56. It's called My Muumuu Was a Boo-Boo. And that is just how she felt, while at the same time feeling generally sad about a trip to the tropics. Glenn would have none of this. Your dress was divine, and you have nothing to do with the heat. Which had her thinking about her father, who'd say, despite the fact that he'd grown up in Minneapolis and was a Southern transplant, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Kitchens are universally warm when in use, thought Charlie to himself as he lay alone in his bed, a bed in which he'd been lying alone most every night now for some 2 decades. He'd been thinking of Geraldine and Glenn and their fateful evening, and he was parched. He'd gone through this over and over in his head in the past 6 years. The anniversary of the tragic event was coming up the next day, which he knew he could never seem to unknow. And the event was something, impending anniversary or no, that he'd dwelt upon and used way too much of his headspace mulling over ever since. Mainly he wondered about the reference to the South, the hot kitchen quote he knew was widely attributed to President Harry S. Truman from way back in 1942 when he was still a state senator in, of all places, Idaho. He'd never once been to Idaho, though a sweet lady with whom he'd had the pleasure of taking out to the movies a few times back in his early 20s, had moved to Coeur d'Alene, although she'd done this without letting him know until she was there in a rather spare letter that had a commemorative stamp emblazoned with the portrait of Lyndon B. Johnson, sometime when Charlie was well in his early 20s. But he'd always had the distinct impression that it was not a place known for its heat. Kitchens, however, were, he supposed, potentially, when in some use, rather universally warm, at the very least. He wondered if these assumptions of his were in a way unduly biased and decided that in the grand scheme of things it really didn't matter. But that was Charlie for you, always dismissing any thoughts that required further layers of contemplation or that when stuck in his head for a moment seemed to come to a fork or split or wall that indicated that to think further on the subject would require it to add more complexity than he was willing to give it. And so his thoughts went back to the actual tragedy, that moment on that fateful night that had no inherent complexity and was so straightforward, as such things go, was just a one-lane road that he could putter upon with whatever speed he desired as long as he wanted, meeting no traffic whatsoever, hardly even a curve in the road, with the horizon lit in some way or another by a rising or falling sun or a bold and heavy moon that he had generally could not see, but that would be impossible not to be in some small way continually aware of, or else by rows of street lamps, which he'd pass at an always steady rate, which when he had the passenger window next to which there'd never once be a passenger open even the slightest bit, he'd hear a steady whump, pause, whump each time he passed one, while his shadow, and this was something he didn't really consciously notice, would move quickly from the dashboard in front of him to the back seat, and consistently and with ever-increasing speeds move nearer to him until whump, back it was at the dashboard again, then